Forced into marriage, the billionaire broke on their first night, his control shattered completely. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The storm had been beating against the windows for almost an hour when Mira Hale realized she had run out of time. A folder sat in front of her on the long mahogany table, its surface lacquered enough that she could see her own trembling reflection. Her hair was damp from the rain, her thrift store coat clinging to her shoulders, and her fingers hovered just above the pen like it weighed more than the entire house she was standing in. She had never been inside a place like this, ceilings so high her voice would echo, chandeliers dripping crystals, a fireplace large enough to step into. But none of it felt warm. Especially not under the eyes of the man sitting across from her. Adrian Blackwell. Billionaire. Heir to the Blackwell empire. And the man she was being forced to marry. Not because she wanted to. Not because he wanted to. But because life had cornered her in a way that made this contract look like the only door left open. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of controlled power, dark suit, clean lines, gaze sharp enough to cut through lies. Yet there was something brittle under the surface tonight, something strained, as if he too was trapped in a deal he couldn't escape. It's a one-year marriage, he said quietly, each word measured. Strictly contractual. You follow the terms, and I'll take care of your mother's medical bills, your family's mortgage, and the debt collectors breathing down your neck. You walk out tonight, and I can't promise they'll give you another week. Mira swallowed hard. She knew this already. She had memorized every line of the contract. She knew the price of her signature. Still, hearing it aloud made her stomach twist. And the rules, she whispered. Adrian's jaw flexed once, the only sign of emotion he'd allowed since she arrived. No intimacy. No expectations. You show up beside me at 7 public events. You don't interfere with my business. And when the year ends, we part ways quietly. You'll be free. Free. The word tasted like a lie, but she nodded anyway. Her mother's medical chart had been on the kitchen table that morning, surgery needed within weeks, cost impossible. Mira had spent all afternoon begging loan offices, credit unions, even her manager at the diner. Doors closed one after another. Until the black sedan arrived with a message from Adrian Blackwell. She didn't even know why he had chosen her. Just that desperation had stolen her right to ask. Adrian pushed the contract a little closer. Sign it, Mira. Before something else goes wrong tonight. He didn't say it cruelly. In fact, his voice carried something she couldn't place, urgency, maybe even fear. But she was too overwhelmed to read between the lines. Her fingers closed around the pen, cold metal against cold skin. She tried to steady her breathing. She tried to remember her mother's voice telling her to be brave. The storm outside cracked with thunder, making her flinch. Adrian didn't move, but she felt his gaze tighten on her, as if even he sensed the moment everything in both their lives was about to shift. Mira signed. A single stroke, then another. A loop. A final line. It was done. Adrian reached for the contract, and though his hand was steady, something like relief, or dread, flashed across his eyes. That was when Mira noticed it. His other hand, hidden against his side beneath the table, had been balled into a fist so tight his knuckles had gone pale. She didn't know it yet, but the man who built an empire on ruthless composure had already begun to crack, right here, in their first night as husband and wife. And everything he thought he controlled was about to shatter. The thunder rolled farther away as the clock in the great room inched past midnight, but Mira had no sense of time anymore. All she could hear was her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as she stood in the center of the mansion's marble foyer, the contract still warm from her touch. Adrian led her through the hallway without a word, his footsteps controlled and even, but the tension in his shoulders told a different story. It was as if he was holding himself together by force. She followed him past oil paintings, quiet hallways, and tall windows streaked with rain. Everything around her looked expensive enough that she was afraid to breathe too hard. When they reached the grand staircase, Adrian finally spoke. "Your room is upstairs. First door on the right." His voice was steady, but there was something hollow behind it, as if he had lost a battle no one knew he was fighting. Mira nodded, even though her throat felt tight. "Thank you." She was not sure if that was the right thing to say to a man she had just married in the strangest way possible, but he did not react, only motioned for her to go ahead. As she walked up the steps, she could feel his eyes on her back. Not possessive. Not admiring. Just watchful, like he was trying to understand what he had just done. The bedroom was breathtaking, easily 3 times bigger than the apartment she had grown up in. A massive four-poster bed, soft golden lighting, and a balcony that overlooked the storm fading into a quiet drizzle. Her overnight bag, the small canvas one with the broken zipper, looked painfully out of place on the velvet bench. Mira stood awkwardly in the center of the room, unsure whether to sit, to unpack, or simply to disappear. She startled when she heard the soft knock. Adrian stood at the doorway, the faintest hesitation in his posture. "I wanted to be clear," he said, choosing his words carefully. "Tonight is nothing. No expectations. You do not owe me anything more than what we agreed." Mira let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. "I understand." He nodded, but he did not leave. He looked past her, not at her, as if speaking to a memory only he could see. "This house has plenty of rooms. If you ever feel uncomfortable, you have options. You are not trapped here." It was strangely gentle coming from him. Mira watched him for a moment, noticing what she had missed earlier. His tie was loosened, his shirt collar slightly creased, and there were faint shadows under his eyes. He looked tired. Not physically tired, but weighed down. "Adrian," she said softly, "why me?" His jaw tightened. For a moment she thought he would shut down. Give her nothing. But he surprised her. "Because I needed someone with no connection to my world. Someone the board could not manipulate, someone who would not benefit from destroying me." His gaze finally met hers, and the intensity in it made her breath catch. "And because you said no the first time." Mira blinked. "I did not even get a chance to say no." "You tried," he said quietly. "Most people do not try." She did not know what to do with that. Before she could answer, he stepped back from the doorway. "Get some rest, Mira. Tomorrow will be a long day." He turned away, but she heard it, the smallest break in his composure, the faint exhale of a man who had spent years being unshakable and had finally reached the edge. When the door clicked shut, Mira sank onto the edge of the bed. Her hands were still trembling. She was now married to a man she barely knew, a billionaire whose life was nothing like hers, a man who carried secrets behind his controlled expressions. And though she did not understand why, she felt something in him had cracked tonight. Not anger. Not cruelty. Something else. Something human. Outside, the storm faded into silence. Inside, Mira realized her real storm was only beginning. Morning sunlight crept through the sheer curtains before Mira opened her eyes, a soft gold that felt too gentle for the kind of night she had survived. For a moment she did not remember where she was, then the edges of reality closed around her like a slow tightening net. The mansion. The contract. The marriage that did not feel like a marriage at all. She sat up slowly, rubbing her palms together as if trying to warm a part of herself that had gone cold. The room was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that did not exist in the life she used to know. Back home there had always been noise, her mother humming in the kitchen, cars passing the apartment building, neighbors shouting across the hallway. Here the air felt thick, untouched, like the world expected her to walk carefully so she would not disturb anything. After washing up, she changed into the modest dress she had packed. It looked out of place in the large mirror, but it was all she had. When she stepped into the hallway, a housekeeper appeared with a polite smile, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "Good morning, Mrs. Blackwell," the woman said. Mira almost corrected her, then remembered she could not. Not publicly. Not even inside this mansion. "Breakfast is ready. Mr. Blackwell is waiting." Mira followed her downstairs, her heart thudding faster with each step. She did not know what to expect after last night. Adrian had looked like a man holding himself together by threads. Would he pretend none of it happened? Would he be distant again? In the dining room, the table stretched longer than the living room she grew up in, but Adrian sat at the far end with a cup of black coffee. He looked composed, freshly shaven, suit jacket on, every inch the controlled billionaire he was known to be. Only his eyes betrayed him. There was a heaviness there that had not disappeared with the sunrise. "Good morning," he said. The words were polite but carried a softness she had not heard from him before. "Good morning," Mira replied, unsure if she should sit beside him or farther down the table. Adrian noticed her hesitation and gestured to the seat on his right. "Here. It is closer. You do not need to treat this like an official dinner." She sat carefully, trying not to let her nerves show. A server set a plate of eggs, toast, and fruit in front of her. It was more food than she had eaten in days. Adrian noticed the way she stared at it and cleared his throat. "If it is not to your taste, the kitchen can prepare something different." "No," Mira said quickly. "It is perfect. I am not used to this." "You will adjust," Adrian replied quietly, then paused as if the words tasted too sharp. "At least for the year." The reminder of the contract sat heavy between them. He took a sip of coffee, then glanced at her again, studying her like she was a puzzle he had not solved yet. "I arranged for a driver to take you to visit your mother today," he said. Mira's breath caught. "Thank you. Truly." Something flickered in his expression, something that looked almost like guilt. "I should have offered sooner." Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his posture changed instantly. His shoulders stiffened, his jaw clenched, and the controlled billionaire mask slid back into place. "The board is demanding a meeting," he said, pushing back from the table. "They want to ensure the marriage is legitimate." Mira felt a chill. "Do they not believe you?" "They believe what benefits them," Adrian replied. "But you will be joining me at the meeting today. It is time they see you." Her stomach twisted. "Today?" "Yes." His tone was firm, but not unkind. "I will not throw you unprepared into their world. After you visit your mother, a stylist will meet you. A simple refresh. Nothing overwhelming." She nodded even though her palms had begun to sweat. As Adrian walked toward the doorway, he hesitated, one hand on the frame. For a moment he looked like he wanted to say something more, something real, but then he swallowed it down and straightened. "Mira," he said without turning, "do not let them intimidate you. They do not know you the way I do." She froze, stunned by the gentle weight of his voice. And then he was gone, leaving her alone in a mansion that suddenly felt less cold than it did an hour ago. But the real test was only beginning, and somewhere deep inside, she sensed that whatever cracked in Adrian last night was far from done breaking. The drive to the hospital was quiet, but not an uncomfortable kind of quiet. Mira sat in the back seat of the black sedan, watching the city slide past the window like a world she no longer belonged to. The driver, a man in his 50s with kind eyes, glanced at her through the mirror. "Mr. Blackwell said to take as much time as you need," he said. Mira nodded, grateful for the softness in his tone. The hospital looked the same as yesterday, but today she walked in with a thin gold band on her finger and a marriage license with Adrian's name on it tucked inside her purse. She wondered what her mother would think if she were awake enough to understand any of it. When she stepped into the room, the steady beeping of the monitor wrapped around her like a familiar, bittersweet rhythm. Her mother lay still, her frail hands resting on the blanket, her breathing shallow but steady. Mira sat down carefully, brushing her fingers against her mother's knuckles. "I am here, Mom," she whispered. "And things have changed." She wanted to explain everything, but how could she? How could she tell her mother that her life had split open and rearranged itself in a single night? That she had signed a contract to save them both? That she was now living in a mansion with a man who hid emotions like they were weaknesses he could not afford? She stayed for almost 2 hours, talking softly, updating her mother on simple things to keep her voice steady. When she finally stood up to leave, she placed a gentle kiss on her mother's forehead. "I will fix this," she whispered. "I promise." The stylist arrived at the mansion shortly after Mira returned, a cheerful woman named Elaine who spoke with a warm, confident energy. "Nothing too dramatic," Elaine said, circling Mira with thoughtful eyes. "Just enough to help you feel like you belong in a boardroom instead of being interrogated by one." Mira tried to laugh, but nerves tightened her stomach. Elaine adjusted her hair, softened her makeup, and chose a navy dress that looked professional but not flashy. When she stepped in front of the mirror, Mira barely recognized herself. She looked capable. Strong. Like someone who could handle what waited for her. A little while later, Adrian entered the room. He paused when he saw her, not dramatically, but with a subtle shift in his expression that felt like a quiet exhale. "You look ready," he said. She was sure he meant it as encouragement, but the words carried a weight that was almost vulnerable. "Thank you," she replied. "Are you ready?" His jaw tightened. "As ready as I can be." They drove together to the Blackwell corporate tower, its glass exterior reflecting the sky in sharp, clean angles. As they walked through the lobby, employees stopped to stare. Adrian placed a hand on Mira's back, guiding her gently but firmly, a signal that she was not to be dismissed or questioned. The boardroom was a long, polished space with floor-to-ceiling windows and a table big enough to seat 20. The board members were already there, 9 of them, each one older, sharper, and more calculating than the next. Mira felt her breath catch, but Adrian gave her a small nod, subtle but reassuring. He took his seat at the head of the table, and she sat beside him. One board member, a tall man with silver hair, adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Blackwell, congratulations on your sudden marriage," he said, his tone dripping skepticism. "We were not aware you were even courting anyone." Adrian did not flinch. "My personal life is not a matter for the board." Another member leaned forward. "Forgive us, but the timing is unusual. A marriage announced just days before our next succession review." Mira felt the room shift toward her. Every gaze sharpened. Every stare felt like a test she did not study for. Adrian's voice cut through the tension. "This marriage is legitimate." His words were steady, but beneath the table, Mira sensed the slightest tremor in his posture, as if revealing their relationship to the world threatened more than just his position. The woman seated across the table folded her hands. "Then perhaps Mrs. Blackwell can tell us about herself. We would like to know," the woman now tied to one of the most powerful names in this city. Mira swallowed, her pulse loud in her ears. She glanced at Adrian. For the first time, she saw it clearly, not control, not coldness, but something close to fear. And she realized that this moment was not just her test. It was his as well. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and spoke, hoping her voice would not shake. The boardroom watched. Adrian watched. And Mira understood that everything that came next would decide far more than she ever expected. For a heartbeat the room held its silence, thick and assessing, as every board member watched Mira like she was a specimen under a microscope. She felt the weight of their scrutiny press against her skin, but she steadied her breath and folded her hands on the table. "My name is Mira Hale," she began, her voice softer than she wished but clear enough to carry. "I worked as a server at a small diner on the east side, and before that I was a caregiver for my mother while balancing part-time jobs. I did not grow up with wealth or influence, but I know the value of hard work and responsibility." A few brows lifted, not kindly. One of the board members, a woman with a clipped tone, leaned forward. "And how exactly did you and Mr. Blackwell meet?" Mira felt her pulse stutter, but Adrian spoke before she could. "Mira and I met through a private introduction," he said, his voice firm, not allowing room for challenge. "The details are personal." The woman did not back down. Personal matters become corporate liabilities when they alter public perception. Adrian's jaw clenched, but Mira placed a gentle hand on his arm under the table. It was not planned. It was instinct. The board members noticed the movement, and the shift in the room was immediate. Something softened, if only slightly. Mira drew a slow breath and continued, choosing her words carefully. "I did not marry Adrian for money or status. I married him because I saw a man carrying more than he should, someone who needed stability the way I needed a chance to rebuild my life. We may come from different worlds, but we are committed to making this work." Her honesty landed with quiet force. Not dramatic. Not rehearsed. Just real. Adrian turned his head slightly, his eyes flicking to her with something like stunned gratitude. The man who controlled every expression struggled to hide the tremor of emotion that passed through him. One of the older board members, a man who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "Sincerity is rare in this room," he said. "I appreciate hearing it." The tension eased, not fully, but enough that Mira's lungs finally felt capable of drawing a complete breath. When the meeting ended, the board members filed out with slower, more thoughtful glances toward her. Some respectful. Some calculating. Some merely curious. Once the door clicked shut behind the last one, Adrian exhaled, a long breath that seemed to unwind a thread pulled too tightly. He scrubbed a hand over his jaw and turned to Mira. "You handled that better than anyone I have brought into a boardroom," he said quietly. Mira gave a small, shaky smile. "That was my first boardroom." "Exactly," he replied, sounding almost amazed. They left the tower together, but the moment they stepped into the lobby, a burst of camera flashes exploded around them. Reporters had gathered, spilling across the marble floor like a tide of questions and noise. "Mr. Blackwell, is the marriage real? Mrs. Blackwell, were you aware of his inheritance clause? Did you agree to a prenup? Is this a publicity stunt?" Mira froze, blinded by the lights, overwhelmed by the chaos pressing in on her. Adrian reacted instantly. He moved in front of her, shielding her body with his hands sliding firmly around hers. "We are done here," he said, guiding her through the crowd. He kept his shoulders squared and his voice low, protecting her with a fierceness she did not expect. Even when a reporter shouted something cruel about her background, Adrian stopped, turned his head, and spoke with a cold precision that cut through the noise. "Watch your words," he said. "She is my wife." It was not for show. Mira felt it. It hit her like a jolt of heat. When they finally reached the car and the doors closed, the world outside muffled into silence. Mira released a breath she did not know she had been holding. Adrian looked at her, his eyes still burning with the intensity he had used to push back the crowd. "I will not let them tear you apart," he said. "Not today. Not ever." For the first time since the contract began, Mira believed him. The car hummed softly beneath them as the city blurred past, but inside the cabin the air felt charged, thick with everything unsaid. Mira could still feel the imprint of Adrian's hand around hers, the protective way he had stepped in front of her when the cameras flashed and questions turned vicious. He had looked like a man ready to tear the world apart to defend her, and that thought alone rattled something deep inside her chest. Adrian loosened his tie, exhaling hard as if he had carried the weight of the entire lobby on his shoulders. "I should have anticipated the press," he muttered, his voice low with frustration. "I should not have let them corner you like that." Mira shook her head gently. "You did protect me." He glanced at her, the tension in his jaw easing. "I meant what I said in there," he added quietly. "You are my wife." The words lingered between them much longer than either expected. When they arrived at the mansion, the staff moved quickly, sensing Adrian's agitation, but he dismissed them with a brief nod. He guided Mira inside, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back, not claiming her, just grounding her. The evening light spilled through the tall windows, casting warm gold across the marble floors. For the first time since she arrived, the mansion did not feel so cold. Once they reached the private sitting room, Adrian removed his jacket and rested it over the back of a chair. He looked tired, not physically, but emotionally, like someone carrying a burden he had not shared with anyone. Mira stood near the fireplace, unsure if she should speak or wait. Adrian rubbed the back of his neck, hesitated, then walked toward her. "What you said today," he began slowly, "in the boardroom, it mattered more than you know." Mira blinked, surprised. "I just spoke honestly." "That is exactly why it mattered," he replied. "This world is full of people who only speak to manipulate. You spoke to be understood." He paused then, and for the first time she noticed a faint tremor in his breath. "I have not had that for a long time." Something softened inside her. She could not explain it, but she could feel the truth in his voice. "Adrian," she said gently, "it seems like you are fighting battles alone." His eyes flickered, a flash of something raw, something unguarded, before he looked away. "That is how I was raised. My father used to say that emotions are weak points. Vulnerabilities." Mira stepped closer, her heart tugging in a way she had not expected. "But you are not your father." He looked at her then, really looked, as if her words had cracked something open he had spent years trying to seal shut. His voice dropped to a whisper, rough around the edges. "I do not know how to be anything else." Mira reached out and touched his hand. It was a small gesture, barely a brush of her fingertips, but it made his breath catch. She felt the tension in him, the rigid control, and beneath it a quiet ache. "You do not have to figure it out today," she said softly. "But you do not have to do it alone." Silence settled between them, not heavy this time, but warm. Safe. When Adrian finally spoke, his voice was lower, almost fragile. "No one talks to me the way you do." "Maybe no one sees you the way I do," Mira replied before she realized the weight of what she had said. Adrian's eyes darkened, startled by her honesty. A moment passed, charged, unspoken. Then he stepped back, just enough to steady himself, running a hand through his hair. "I need some air," he murmured, but his voice betrayed more than he intended. Mira followed him onto the balcony, the evening breeze brushing against their skin. The city lights glittered below, a sprawling map of lives and stories they were somehow supposed to navigate together. Adrian rested his hands on the railing, shoulders tense. "Mira," he said quietly, "I do not want to hurt you." She stepped beside him, her voice steady. "You are not hurting me." He turned to her then, the control he always wore like armor slipping further than ever before. "You are changing things," he whispered. "And I do not know how to stop it." Mira felt a flutter in her chest, equal parts fear and something dangerously close to hope. "Maybe you are not supposed to stop it." Their eyes held, the night air thick with the pull neither dared name yet. For the first time since the contract, something real stood between them, delicate but undeniable, and neither of them stepped away. The night air settled around them like a fragile truce, cool against Mira's skin as she stood beside Adrian on the balcony. The city lights shimmered below, 100 stories unfolding at once, yet the only story she could feel was the one tightening quietly between them. Adrian's confession still echoed in her mind, the way his voice had broken at the edges, the way his control had finally slipped. But moments like that never lasted long for a man like him. The next morning proved it. Mira woke early, the weight of last night still clinging to her, but the mansion felt different, tense, as if the walls themselves sensed something shifting. As she descended the stairs, she found Adrian in the main study, speaking to someone with a clipped, irritated tone. It was a voice she had not heard directed at anyone since the night they met. "You had no right," Adrian said sharply. "I do not care what you think this means. You crossed a line." Mira hesitated at the doorway before she realized who he was speaking to. Vanessa. The woman from the boardroom, the one who wore her power like perfume and had studied Mira from across the table with thinly veiled contempt. Vanessa stood with her arms crossed, her expression cool and confident. I crossed a line because you are not thinking clearly, Vanessa replied. This marriage is destabilizing you. Adrian. It is making you reckless. Adrian shot her a glare. You do not get to decide what is best for me. Someone has to, Vanessa snapped. Look at you. You used to be untouchable. Now you are making emotional decisions. Mira felt the word sting even though they were not directed at her. Emotional decisions. The implication was clear. Mira took a step back, not wanting to overhear more, but Vanessa's voice rose again. You think she belongs here? You think she will not drag you down? She is a liability, Adrian. And the board knows it. That was when he snapped. Not loudly. Not violently. But with a raw, unguarded edge Mira had never heard before. Mira is not your concern, he said. She is my wife. Vanessa scoffed. A convenient title for an inconvenient truth. Do you even know who she really is? Mira's breath hitched. Vanessa continued, her tone dripping triumph. Because I do. I had someone look into her background. Into her debts. Her mother's medical bills. Her family's foreclosure. Everything you are trying to clean up. Adrian stiffened. You invaded her privacy. Vanessa stepped closer to him. I protected you. She is desperate, Adrian. People like her will say anything to survive. The words punched the air out of Mira's lungs. People like her. Desperate. Survival. It was everything she feared someone in Adrian's world would eventually say. Adrian slammed his palm against the desk, the sound cracking through the room. Enough. But the damage was already done. Mira stepped into the room before she could stop herself. You are right, she said quietly. Vanessa turned, startled. Adrian froze. Mira lifted her chin, even as her heart pressed painfully against her ribs. I am desperate. I do have debts. I do need help. But I have never lied to him. Not once. Vanessa looked her over slowly, like a judge weighing a verdict she had already decided. You do not belong in this world. Maybe not, Mira said, her voice firming, but that does not make me a threat. Adrian moved toward Mira, his expression filled with a rare and urgent softness. Mira, you do not have to defend yourself to her. She shook her head, stepping back from him, because there was something she needed to say before she shattered in front of them both. Actually, I do. Because you heard everything she said. And part of you believed it. Adrian's eyes widened, hurt flashing across his face. That is not true. But you hesitated, she whispered. It was enough to unravel her composure. Mira swallowed, forcing her voice not to break. Maybe she is right. Maybe I am making things harder for you. Maybe this was a mistake. Adrian reached for her hand, but she stepped back again. Mira, I need space, she said softly. And you need to decide what you truly want. Not what the board wants. Not what your father taught you to believe. You. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Without waiting for an answer, Mira turned and walked toward the staircase, each step echoing through the mansion like a quiet fracture. Behind her, Adrian stood perfectly still, his control shattered for the second time since the night they met, watching the one person who had ever seen him clearly slip out of reach. The hours after Mira walked away stretched into a dull, aching silence that pressed against every wall of the mansion. Adrian remained standing in the study long after Vanessa had left, long after the front door had closed, long after the echo of Mira's footsteps faded up the staircase. He felt the weight of his own stillness, the way his hands trembled slightly, the way the air seemed thinner without her presence anchoring it. It had been years since anything pierced his composure, yet one sentence from Mira had cracked something he could not repair with logic or power. You hesitated. She was right. And the truth of it hollowed him out. That night he barely slept. He sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the contract lying on the nightstand. The signatures were crisp and clean, but the meaning behind them felt heavier than any deal he had ever made. The mansion felt wrong without her voice, without her quiet footsteps, without the gentle steadiness she brought into rooms without even trying. As dawn crept across the windows, he made a decision. A real one. Not driven by obligation or strategy, but by something far more unsettling. By wanting her to stay. When Mira woke in the guest room she had chosen the night before, her pillow was damp with tears she did not remember shedding. She felt foolish for letting Vanessa's words pierce so deeply. But it had not been Vanessa who hurt her. It had been the brief, flickering doubt in Adrian's eyes, the hesitation that told her he was still fighting parts of himself she could not reach. She washed her face, pulled her hair back, and stepped into the hallway with no idea what would come next. She did not expect to find Adrian waiting at the bottom of the stairs, his expression raw with something that looked dangerously close to regret. He straightened when he saw her, but he did not hide the exhaustion in his eyes. "Mira," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." She remained on the last step, keeping a careful distance. "You do not owe me anything. This is a contract." "No," he said firmly, "this is something else." For a moment neither spoke. Then Adrian gestured toward the study. "There is something you need to see." Hesitant but curious, Mira followed him. When she entered the room, she froze. Spread across the desk were documents, folders, and printed records. Vanessa's investigation. Her debts. Her mother's medical reports. The foreclosure notice. Adrian looked at her, his voice steady but filled with a weight she had never heard from him before. "I should have protected your privacy. I should have shut down Vanessa the moment she mentioned looking into you." Mira's throat tightened. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because," he replied, "I want you to know that I destroyed every copy she had. I confronted the rest of the board. And I made it clear that your life is not theirs to dissect." Mira stared at him, stunned. Adrian reached into his jacket and pulled out the contract they had signed. But now it looked different. Half of it had been crossed out with bold black ink. "I removed the clauses about public appearances," he said. "And the no intimacy clause. And the restrictions on your personal life. I removed anything that made this feel like a cage." Mira's breath caught. "Why?" He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the strain in every muscle. "Because I do not want you here because you have to be. I want you here because you choose to be." Her heart hammered in her chest. "Adrian, you are asking for something real." "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And that terrifies me." He looked away for a moment, gathering himself, then met her gaze again. "Last night, when you said I hesitated, you were right. I have spent my entire life being controlled by expectations, by the board, by my father's legacy, by fear of failing the empire I inherited. But when it comes to you, Mira, I am more afraid of losing you than losing everything else." Heat rushed through her chest, overwhelming and disorienting. "Adrian, let me show you something," he murmured. He led her to the far end of the study where a set of curtains covered the wall. With a slow pull, he slid them aside. Behind the curtains was a framed architectural rendering. A small building. A single story. Warm, homelike, inviting. Mira blinked. "What is this?" "A fully funded care center," he said softly, "designed for patients like your mother. I started the process this morning." She stared at him, stunned to silence. "You did this for me?" "No," Adrian said gently. "I did this because you showed me what real responsibility looks like. What compassion looks like. You changed the way I see everything." Her breath trembled as she whispered, "I do not know what to say." Adrian stepped closer, his voice cracking with honesty. "Say you will give me another chance. Not as part of a contract. As a man trying to be worthy of you." Mira felt the walls she had built start to crumble, piece by piece, under the weight of his sincerity. And for the first time since this marriage began, she realized she was standing in front of a man not defined by power or status, but by choices he was finally brave enough to make. For a long moment Mira stood in front of Adrian without saying a word, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to absorb everything that had happened. The revised contract, the destroyed files, the confrontation with the board, the care center he had begun planning, and the way his voice had cracked when he told her he feared losing her more than losing the empire he had spent his life protecting. It was too much and yet, somehow, exactly what she needed to hear. She took a slow breath, steadying her emotions, and looked him in the eyes. "Adrian, you cannot fix everything overnight," she said softly, "and you do not have to. I just need honesty. I need to know you are not hiding behind walls when it comes to us." Adrian nodded, a tension easing from his shoulders like a storm finally breaking. "I am tired of walls, Mira," he confessed. "I am tired of pretending I do not feel anything." He closed the remaining distance between them, but he did not touch her, waiting for her to decide how close he was allowed to be. "You asked me what I truly want," he continued. "I want you. Not the contract. Not the performance. Not the protection of pretending. Just you." Mira felt her throat tighten, but this time with something warm, something steady, something she had not felt in years. "Then you need to understand one thing," she said, her voice trembling in the quiet room. "I do not want a life where I am hidden. I do not want to be a secret or a liability or a chapter you regret." Adrian shook his head immediately. "You are none of those things." "Then show the world," Mira whispered. He met her gaze with a determination she had never seen from him before. "I will." And he did. 2 days later, Adrian called a press conference that filled the corporate tower lobby with reporters, cameras, flashing lights, and enough speculation to shake an entire industry. Mira stood beside him, her hands slightly cold, but her posture strong. Adrian did not hide her behind him this time. He stood with her, shoulder to shoulder, his expression unwavering as he faced the crowd. When the room fell silent, he spoke with a clarity that cut through every whisper. "There has been enough speculation," he began. "Enough questions about my marriage, about my wife, about her past and mine. So let me make something very clear today." He reached for Mira's hand in front of everyone, lacing his fingers through hers with a steadiness that left the entire lobby breathless. "This marriage did not begin traditionally, but it is real. Mira is my partner, and she is here with me by choice. I stand with her today and every day moving forward. Anyone who challenges her challenges me." Reporters surged with questions, but the tone had shifted. The doubt had cracked. The narrative had changed. Even Vanessa, watching from the crowd, stood silent, unable to deny the conviction in Adrian's voice. After the conference, Adrian guided Mira through a side exit, and when the doors closed behind them, the noise outside faded into a distant hum. He turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Thank you for believing I could become this version of myself," he said. "I did not do any of this alone," Mira replied. "You chose to change." A gentle smile touched his lips, the kind of smile that reached all the way into the wounded parts of him. "I chose you." They returned to the mansion hand in hand, but everything felt different now. The rooms no longer echoed with loneliness. The walls no longer held coldness. And when they stepped onto the balcony where so much had shifted between them, the night air felt warm, soft, almost sacred. Adrian turned toward her, resting a hand over her heart. "I do not want a contract anymore," he said. "I want a real marriage. A future. A life with you." Mira felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not tears of fear or uncertainty. They were tears of finally belonging, finally being seen. "Yes," she whispered. "I want that too." Adrian lifted her hand, pressing a slow kiss to her knuckles, sealing a promise that had taken both of them through storms they never expected to survive. The city lights flickered below as if blessing the moment, and in the quiet glow of the night, Mira realized something she should have known all along. Love did not require perfect beginnings. Just truth. Just courage. Just two people choosing each other again and again. And that night, for the first time, they both chose freely.